Timber Talks is brought to you by WoodSolutions. Stay up to date with the latest in timber, the building material that is strong, safe and sustainable. Here is your host, Adam Jones.
The market for mid-rise timber buildings is growing at a rapid pace all around the world, and no more so than USA. Jennifer Cover is the president and CEO of WoodWorks in the USA, which is an organisation very similar to that of us at WoodSolutions here in Australia. So Jennifer has her finger on the pulse of a large range of projects across that part of the world, and a lot of the learnings for them is very applicable for here in Australia. So I was lucky to sit down with her to discuss some of the innovative project delivery models, when to engage with suppliers, and also the cost differences between timber buildings compared to traditional construction. I hope you enjoy this conversation as much as I did, and without any further ado, we'll get into the interview with Jennifer.
And so there's quite a bit of opportunity available in the US. 1.1 billion square feet of construction in this commercial multifamily market is available, and that only includes the building types that are available to wood. So it's not limited by code at all. So all that could be wood construction. And we had less than, I think it was like 25% of it. And so with that, looking at this large amount of availability, it seemed like a great opportunity to try to understand what the hurdles were and see if we could overcome them. And so WoodWorks focuses on providing the education and the one-on-one project assistance to help people make that transition over to wood construction. And it's really not difficult in terms of how to design with wood, but it takes time. It takes time to learn something new, and architects and engineers are billable hours, and so it is hard to try to do something new. So it's not that they don't know how to or aren't able to, it's just more WoodWorks provides the assistance to make it easier for them, and so that learning curve isn't as steep when they want to try to.
Can you talk about what's the projection and the growth you've had over the last, say, since WoodWorks has started in the US and the whole timber market in general?
So there's been a significant shift in the market in terms of where wood is considered. So one of the things that we focused a lot on is taking wood taller in areas where it was not previously considered. So a lot of projects would cap out at 3 or 4 stories, and that was kind of just the understanding. The architect or engineer thought that was as tall as you could take it with wood. And so we've done quite a bit of education in how to design 5 and 6 story buildings with wood construction. So that's been a huge success. Also the use of wood in commercial projects. So that would be hotels, office buildings, retail, healthcare structures, just areas where it wasn't typically the go-to solution. So that's an area we focused quite a bit on. And then the new upcoming kind of trend I think that we're going to see a lot more wood used is in taller applications. So I don't know if you're aware, but in the US, in January this year, we passed a code change that's going to allow for wood structures that are built in mass timber up to 18 stories. And so that's something that is very new for the US. And so it's an opportunity to educate architects and engineers on how to do that and provide some new resources and skills out in the workplace. And I think that's going to be something that will be a significant shift here, because to date, the tallest wood building is an 8-story building, carbon 12. It's under 85 feet, the limit. And moving forward, what we hope to see is people really pushing that boundary. So what we're seeing right now already is, just since this has moved forward, is there's about 68 projects that our team is providing assistance on that are over 7 stories. So that's a pretty big jump from where we're at right now. So we'll see what happens.
And for the different project types, the building types you just mentioned, and for different stories, like which buildings are, say, lightweight frame and which buildings are going into mass timber?
Yeah, and so that's interesting in terms of, we're going to really see what happens with the market and how things work out. A lot of it comes down to some of the key drivers for mass timber. So if they want the material exposed, it has to be a mass timber solution. It can't be a light frame. And so if that's a key driver on a project, that will push it towards mass timber. If there is an issue around labor shortage in a region, that also tends to push it towards mass timber, because there's so few folks that are actually needed in the field for the construction aspect of the project. In terms of light frame is definitely the most cost competitive option compared to steel, concrete, every other option pretty much out there. And so the applications where it fits well, that's going to be the prevailing choice typically. I think right now it's still working itself out as to where the cost difference makes sense to jump to mass timber. The obvious jump is in the region where potentially, so light frame can only be used up to 6 stories in the U.S. And so beyond that, it would have to be mass timber. And so right now, where there's a sweet spot sort of from mass timber and just a new wood option is really from 7 to probably 12 stories, that it doesn't really make sense a lot of times for a general contractor to move to steel or concrete because the cost, is a significant jump. Yep. But in those heights, they're able to get more units per square footage if they can go taller. So that vertical option there with sticking with wood, but making that transition to mass timber over light frame, that's kind of the opportunity there. Do
you have any numbers into how cost competitive timber is with traditional construction in, say, a percentage terms?
Yeah, so light frame construction tends to be like 15 to 30% kind of quotes I've heard all in there in terms of comparing it to a concrete solution. So that's your traditional light frame, 2x4s, 2x6s, and plywood and OSB. Okay. And then for mass timber, again, it's kind of all over where it's coming in right now in terms of various projects, and a lot of people are keeping it kind of close to the vest because it's their proprietary edge right now. But there is a very well-known general contractor who has spoken at a lot of our events, and according to them, they say that mass timber is cost neutral compared to concrete. It's slightly less than steel, but it's 20% faster than both of them. So from a construction perspective, there's a huge savings in terms of time. And so that's, again, it depends on how you're looking at it. So if you're looking at material only, or are you looking at the complete project over time? But regardless, it definitely is a very competitive option. And
in addition to that, are you seeing some increases in rental yields as well for having exposed timber and, being a market differentiator, especially in office buildings?
So there's a number of projects where they have stated that is the case, that the use of mass timber is really what helped move the project forward in terms of the draw to the workforce. So it is something that, so I'm trying to think of the projects. There's one in Oregon in which they said, I believe it was $7 per square foot increase in the rent that they were able to fetch on that project comparatively to ones and other materials in the same area. And then there's another project in Texas, I believe, where they were talking about how they felt that the use of CLT or exposed mass timber is what brought in clientele and leased it out much quicker than the other projects were leasing out in that area. So there is something about the sort of the work environment that it creates. It's a very unique space, and it does have a significant draw to people that are looking for higher end office space for their employees.
Recently in the US, you've got new companies like Contractor and Sidewalk Labs. I was lucky to have Michael Marks on this podcast, who's, as you know, started Contractor. What are your thoughts on disruptors or organisations like that and the influence they might have in the future?
Yeah, it's a really exciting time in terms of kind of seeing how this will all shake out. I think there's so much opportunity being generated, and we're really everyone's testing out different models to see what might work best. Obviously, in Europe, it's much more vertically integrated across the board. And in the US, it seems like there's testing a lot of different approaches. So there's, some manufacturers who want to just produce, billets, just panels that then a secondary manufacturer might do the CNCing for. There are some that, kind of are partial of that. I think a lot of manufacturers are trying to figure out, what amount of engineering will be expected from the market, as well as, is on-site installation going to be expected? Is it going to be required over time? Is it something that could be, another discipline could be taking care of that? Is the most cost-effective thing going to be going straight from forest all the way through to the project delivery? I think it's still hard to say, but it is exciting. There's a lot of room for innovation. And I think we'll just have to wait and see. And I don't think that it'll be a one-size-fits-all. It seems like that there'll be, different opportunities to deliver in different ways.
Mm-hmm. Is there any portion of new styles of delivery that might be working, say something like early contractor involvement or anything like that, compared to, say, how you do a steel or concrete building?
Yeah, I think across the board, the earlier the manufacturer's involved, the general contractor can be involved, the better off you are. I think it is a challenge, though, with the way that the current approach with construction, building and construction in the U.S., so it is a bit at odds with that. So we'll see, again, how that sort of works out over time. But ideally, yes, I mean, from the perspective of, being the most efficient as you can in your structural design, making sure that, how you lay out the wall lines has the most minimum waste possible based on the press lengths. So there's a lot of aspects of it that I think are very helpful if the manufacturer, the general contractor, the entire team is on board very early. Again, that's just a little bit at odds as to how we typically do jobs here in the U.S. And so I think, we'll see how that transitions, and maybe there's a middle ground that's found that works well.
What are some of the biggest challenges you're facing in the USA in developing the market? Obviously, you've had a huge win recently with the code changes for 18 stories. Is there any challenges or pushback at the moment that you're trying to overcome?
The main challenge that we ran into was sort of this situation of the hidden veto, where the architect, the engineer, even the project owner was very interested in trying mass timber. And it wasn't until it got to the point of bringing in the general contractor and having those meetings, and in some of those meetings we happened to be involved, and it became very evident that the general contractor was not familiar with mass timber, as there's no reason they should have been. It hasn't been introduced to them. And so there was some hesitancy to go that route. And so from the general contractor's perspective, there was a lot of risk involved, and that leads to contingencies and kind of an uncertainty around how you even lay the subs out, how you can realize the quicker construction time. That has to be sequenced properly in order for that to work, because if the critical path is not correct, then you've got some issues there with something holding it up when it should have gone a lot quicker. So again, it's the unknown. And so with that, we once we realized that was an issue, we shifted and diversified our audience. And so now we're reaching out to general contractors and installers to help educate them on the construction management side of this, to help share some information and some insight on how they can do this cost effectively. And I think there'd be a lot of advancement now, because I think that as some of them have stepped into this space, and a number of them are starting to own it, they actually have sort of divisions that are focused on mass timber within their larger umbrella company. And I think this is when we'll start to really see some movement here, because again, we're trying to share from what we know and from what we've experienced, but as they start doing it firsthand, and if they're willing to kind of share that through some of the construction management workshops that we're doing, we see that as an opportunity to really spread to other folks as well.
For your code changes, are you allowed to have exposed timber as part of the code change, and that's part of the deemed to satisfy cookbook kind of solution, is that right?
Yes, so there's 3 different levels in the new heavy timber categorization. And so one is to 8 stories, and that one can be fully exposed. And then there's a 12-story that's partially exposed, and then the 18 is fully protected. So each level has different requirements, and that's all based on the fire testing that was conducted as part of the ICC ad hoc committee on tall wood. So the group that pushed that or helped present that and bring it forward, it was a very diverse group. It was folks from the architectural world, engineering, even from the different materials, not just wood, but I think there's steel and concrete were represented on there as well. And so with that, they did a full-scale 2-story apartment building, fully loaded, that was then subjected to fire exposure. And through all that is how they determined the percentages that could be exposed.
So one of the big opportunities with timber is the sustainability credentials and replacing steel and concrete, which are, we all know is somewhat of a dirty material. Can our forests and our plantations sustain a big jump or chop into the market share of, say, concrete, do you think?
So I am not a forester. I'm a structural engineer. But I would say that based on my understanding, so one, I guess to start, is that those folks related to forestry and sustainability and forest management are very, very intimately involved in this. So the U.S. Forest Service is very close to what is happening here. And they consider this an incredible opportunity to actually improve the health of our forests, because it's the first time that there's an opportunity to take what is considered low value, sort of hazardous fuels, materials, smaller diameter trees off the forest, particularly in forest thinning operations, and those can then end up in a high value end use product. So now all of a sudden there's an economical motivator to help improve the health of the forest. So that hopefully we'll see reductions in fire and beetle kill and other issues that were really real challenges for us in the U.S. So there is an opportunity here to really turn around what's happening in terms of landscape restoration and make a big difference. In terms of will there be enough forest? The facts that I do know in terms of what the Forest Service has shared is that private forest owners do have a very strong economic incentive to sustainably manage their land, obviously for the long term, because this is something that they want to see ongoing, and so replanting is incredibly important. And today, private landowners grow. So the fact that, or statistic that I have is that they grow 40% more wood than they can remove in a given year.
Wow. And
that from 1953 to 2011, the total forest growth increased by 50%. So, and again, there's a lot of groups that are watching this closely. The Architecture 2030 group recently convened a meeting with all the stakeholders kind of involved. So there's a lot of forestry and folks that are involved in environmental side of things and the sustainability side, and bringing them all together to kind of talk it through, because this is an amazing solution from a carbon sequestration and sustainability perspective, as long as we can do it in a sustainable manner. And so really that's the key there, is to make sure that that is done. And that's what a lot of those conversations are taking place. So those folks who are the preservers and caretakers of our forests are watching this and are making sure that as this moves forward, that it is done sustainably. And so I think that's really knowing that everyone's involved, I think is an important factor in this. And that will really help, I think, over time, make sure that this is done in a way that can be done, for generations to come.
Absolutely. So we're coming toward the end now. You've got your finger on a lot of different projects, and you deal with a lot of different consultants, and you've got a good understanding of where things are heading in the future. Do you have any advice for consultants listening in terms of how they can be the most relevant in the future for, say, what timber construction might end up being?
Yeah, I think that there is, kind of probably 7 key drivers to be thinking about when you consider mass timber. So the ones that we see as being of the most importance is the environmental side of this. It's an incredible environmental story. The aesthetic appeal is really important. The speed of construction, if that is critical to your owner, that is something that mass timber can really provide. Any urban infill type projects, so where potentially you want to add vertical density, you can, because of its lightweight, you're able to add it on top of other existing structures. Also, if you have tight construction constraints, that also is something that could be a driver. Labor shortages, again, if you have an owner who's got a project in an area where the cost of labor is really high, or there's a shortage of labor, it's something that could provide some stability with going with mass timber. Elevated structural performance is another driver. Again, the lightweight can really help with lower foundation costs. And biophilia, so kind of healthy buildings. So if you have an owner who's very interested in, perhaps capitalizing on some of these aspects that allow, lower stress in the work environment, just a healthier building in general. ULI recently did a study on the benefits of healthy buildings. And it's got some great information in terms of the reduction in sick days, productivity. It's really impressive. And, wood is just one part of that overall healthy building discussion, but it's a pretty important part. And so I think for architects and engineers wanting to set themselves apart, that it's a great opportunity to think about some of those drivers. And if you have a building owner who is looking at, kind of setting themselves apart, that you can really provide that to them by utilizing a wood solution, and WoodWorks can help them if they're interested.
The final question, what are your thoughts on the future of timber construction?
So I think there is, again, tremendous opportunity. We're just sort of scratching the surface. In commercial projects, wood only has about 11% of the market that it could by code have. And in institutional, we only have about 14%. So again, a lot of room for growth. So just a lot of opportunity. I think it's a great way to diversify project types. But I do believe that it is, strongly believe that it's, kind of the only sustainable way to build for our future. I think, with continued population growth, we need a way to sustainably address that and to build in a way that's responsible. And I think that mass timber and wood construction in general is that solution.
If you've got a project coming up and you're not sure whether it should be timber, then the Mid-Rise Advisory Program will be able to help. One of the things we can do is a feasibility analysis. So looking at the project from the point of view of fire, costing, structural engineering, the supply, and building and installation and so forth to work out whether the project is right for timber. If this is something you're interested in, then get in touch with me at jones@woodsolutions.com.au and I'll put you in touch with the right team member. And of course, for those listening from the US, if you are interested in getting project support from Jennifer and her team at WoodWorks, you can find help at woodworks.org.